Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight I will be reading you Economics, a very short introduction by Partha Dasgupta. We'll begin by reading the preface and the prologue as they are quite short and I feel they are worthwhile. This will be followed by chapters 1, 2, 3, 4 and 6. Without further ado, let us begin. Or at least we would begin if the app wasn't bugging out and the pages were all displaying as completely blank. It seems to have fixed itself. All right. So, the preface. Writing an introduction to economics is both easy and hard. It's easy because in one way or another we are all economists. No one, for example, has to explain to us what prices are. We face them every day. Experts may have to explain why banks offer interest on saving deposits or why risk aversion is a tricky concept, why the way we measure wealth misses much of the point of measuring it. But none of these is an alien idea. As economics matters to us, we also have views on what should be done to put things right when we feel they are wrong. And we hold our views strongly because our ethics drive our politics and our politics inform our economics. When thinking economics, we don't entertain doubts, so the very reasons we want to study economics act as stumbling blocks even as we try to uncover the pathways by which the economic world gets shaped. But as economics is in large measure about those pathways, it's as evidence-based a social science as is possible. It shouldn't be surprising that most often disagreements people have over economic issues are ultimately about their reading of quote-unquote facts and not about the quote-unquote values that they hold, which is why writing an introduction for economics is hard. When I first drew up plans to write this book, I had it in mind to offer readers an overview of economics as it appears in leading economic journals and textbooks. But even through the analytical and empirical core of economics, even though the analytical and empirical core of economics has grown from strength to strength over the decades, I haven't been at ease with the selection of topics that textbooks offer for discussion, such as rural life in poor regions, that is, the economic life of some 2.5 billion people, doesn't get mentioned at all. Nor with the subjects that are emphasized in the leading economics journals. In brackets, nature rarely appears there as an active player. I do apologize if I stumble on words sometimes. It's one of the first few times of me doing this kind of recording, so I expect that over the course of the first week I will grow up to scratch and it'll become far more clear-cut and I won't trip over my sentences. But for now, I ask that you forgive me for my ineloquence as I warm up over these next few days. Anyway, I shall try my greatest. Let us carry on. It also came home to me that Oxford University Press had asked me to write a very short introduction to economics, and there are economics textbooks that are over 1,000 pages long. So it struck me that I should abandon my original plan and offer an account of the reasoning we economists apply in order to understand the social world around us, and then deploy that reasoning to some of the most urgent problem humanity faces today. It's only recently that I realized that I would be able to do that only if I shaped the discourse around the lives of my two literary grandchildren, Becky and Desta. Becky's and Desta's lives are as different as they can be, but as they are both my grandchildren, I believe I understand them. More importantly, economics has helped me to understand them. The ideas developed here were framed and explored in my book, An Inquiry into Well-Being and Destitution, 1993. While writing that book, I realized that economics had increasingly driven my ethics, and that my ethics, in turn, had informed my politics. As that is an unusual causal chain, the earlier book was more technical and a lot heavier. Theoretical and empirical advances since it was published have led me to hold the viewpoint I advanced there even more strongly now. I understand things much better than I did then, including why I don't understand many things. The present work is a natural extension of my earlier book. While preparing this monograph, I have benefited greatly from correspondence and discussions with, and now there's a long list of people that I think you and I alike do not have time to read. So let us move swiftly forwards into the prologue. Becky's world. Becky, who is 10 years old, lives with her parents and an older brother Sam in a suburban town in America's Midwest. Becky's father works in a farm specializing in property law. Depending on the firm's profit, his annual income varies somewhat, but is rarely below $145,000. Becky's parents are at college. For a few years, her mother worked in publishing, but when Sam was born, she decided to concentrate on raising a family. Now that both Becky and Sam attend school, she does voluntary work in local education. The family live in a two-story house. It has 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms upstairs and toilet downstairs, a large drawing room and dining room, a modern kitchen, and a family room in the basement. There is a plot of land at the rear, the backyard, which the family use for leisure activities. Although their property is partially mortgaged, Becky's parents own stocks and bonds and have a saving account in the local branch of a national bank. Becky's father and his firm jointly contribute to this retirement pension. He also makes monthly payments into a scheme with the bank that will cover college education for Becky and Sam. The family's assets and their lives are insured. Becky's parents often remark that because federal taxes are high, they have to be careful with money. And they are. Nevertheless, they own 2 cars, the children attend camp each summer, and the family take a vacation together once camp is over. Becky's parents also remark that her generation will be much more prosperous than theirs. Becky wants to save the environment and insists on biking to school. Her ambition is to become a doctor. Desta's world. Desta, who is about 10 years old as well, lives with her parents and 5 siblings in a village in subtropical southwest Ethiopia. The family live in a 2-room, grass-roofed mud hut. Desta's father grows maize and teff, which is a staple cereal crop unique to Ethiopia, on half a hectare of land that the government has awarded them. Desta's older brother helps him to farm the land and care for the household's livestock, which consist of a cow, a goat, and a few chickens. The small quantity of teff produced is sold so as to raise the cash income, but the maize is in large measure consumed by the household as a staple. Desta's mother works a small plot next to their cottage, growing cabbage, onions, and enset, a year-round root crop that also serves as a staple. In order to supplement their household income, she brews a local drink made from maize. As she is also responsible for cooking, cleaning, and minding the infants, her workday usually lasts 14 hours. Despite the long hours, it wouldn't be possible for her to complete the tasks on her own. As the ingredients are all raw, cooking them alone takes 5 hours or more. So Desta and her older sister help their mother with household chores and mind their younger siblings. Although a younger brother attends the local school, neither Desta nor her older sister have ever been enrolled there. Her parents can neither read nor write, but they are numerate. Excuse me. I'll take a sip of water. Desta's home has no electricity or running water. Around where they live, sources of water, land for grazing cattle, and the woodlands are communal property. They are shared by people in Desta's village, but the villagers don't allow outsiders to make use of them. Each day, Desta's mother and the girls fetch water, collect fuel wood, and pick berries and herbs from the local commons. Desta's mother frequently complains that the time and effort needed to collect their daily needs has increased over the years. There is no financial institution nearby to offer either credit or insurance. As funerals are expensive occasions, Desta's father long ago joined a community insurance scheme, an IDIR, to which he contributes monthly. When Desta's father purchased a cow they now own, he used the entire cash he had accumulated and stored at home, but had to supplement that with funds borrowed from kinsfolk, with a promise to repay the debt when he had the ability to do so. In turn, when they are in need, his kinfolk come to him for a loan, which he supplies if he is able to. Desta's father says that such patterns of reciprocity he and those close to him practice are part of their culture. He says also that his sons are his main assets, as they are the ones who will look after him and Desta's mother in their old age. Economic statisticians estimate that, adjusting for differences in the cost of living between Ethiopia and the United States, Desta's family income is about $5,500 per year, of which $1,100 are attributable to the products they draw from the local commons. However, as rainfall varies year to year, Desta's family income fluctuates widely. In bad years, the grain they store at home gets depleted well before the next harvest. Food is then so scarce that they all grow weaker, the younger children especially so. It is only after harvest that they regain their weight and strength. Periodic hunger and illnesses have meant that Desta and her siblings are somewhat stunted. Over the years, Desta's parents have lost 2 children in their infancy, stricken by malaria in one case and diarrhea in the other. There have also been several miscarriages. Desta knows she will be married, in all likelihood to a farmer, like her father, 5 years from now, and will then live on her husband's land in a neighbouring village. She expects her life to be similar to that of her mother. The Economist's Agenda. That the lives people are able to construct differ enormously across the globe is a commonplace. In our age of travel, it is even a common sight. That Becky and Desta face wildly different futures is also something we have come to expect, perhaps also to accept. Nevertheless, it may not be out of turn to imagine that the girls are intrinsically very similar. They both enjoy playing, eating, and gossiping. They are close to their families. They turn to their mothers when in distress. They like pretty things to wear, and they both have the capacity to be disappointed, get annoyed, and be happy. Their parents are also alike. They are knowledgeable about the ways of their worlds. They also care about their families, finding ingenious ways to meet the recurring problem of producing income and allocating resources among family members, over time and allowing for unexpected contingencies. So, a promising route for exploring the underlying causes behind their vastly different conditions of life would be to begin by observing that the opportunities and obstacles the family face are very different, and that in some sense Desta's family are far more restricted in what they are able to be and do than Becky's. Economics in great measure tries to uncover the processes that influence how people's lives come to be what they are. The discipline also tries to identify ways to influence those who process so as to improve the prospects of those who are hugely constrained in what they are able to be and to do. The former activity involves finding explanations, while the latter tries to identify policy prescriptions. Economists also make forecasts of the conditions of economic life and what they are going to be. But if the predictions are to be taken seriously, they have to be built on an understanding of the processes that shape people's lives, which is why the attempt to explain takes precedence over forecasting. The context in which explanations are sought or in which prescriptions are made could be a household, a village, a district, a country, or even the whole world. The extent to which people or places are aggregated merely reflects the details with which we choose to study the social world. Imagine that we wish to understand the basis on which food is shared among household members in a community. Household income would no doubt be expected to play a role, but we would need to look inside the households if we are to discover whether food is allocated on the basis of age, gender, and status. If we find that it is, we should ask why they play a role and what policies prescriptions, if any, commend themselves. In contrast, suppose we want to know whether the world as a whole is wealthier today than it was 50 years ago. As the question is about global averages, we would be justified in ironing out differences within and among households. Averaging is required over time as well. The purpose of the study and the cost of collecting information influence the choice of the unit of time over which the averaging is done. The population census in India, for example, is conducted every 10 years. More frequent censuses would be more costly and wouldn't yield extra information of any great importance. In contrast, if we are to study the changes in volume of home sales across seasons, even annual statistics would miss the point of the inquiry. Monthly statistics on home sales are a favorite compromise between detail and the cost of obtaining detail. Modern economics, by which I mean a style of economics taught and practiced in today's leading universities, likes to start the inquiries from the ground up, from individuals, through the household, village, district, state, country, to the whole world. In various degrees, the million of individual decisions shape the eventualities people face, as both theory, common sense, and evidence tell us that there are enormous numbers of consequences of what we all do. Some of those consequences have been intended, but many are equally unintended. There is, however, a feedback in that those consequences, in turn, go to shape what people subsequently can do and choose to do. When Becky's family drive their cars or use electricity, or when Desta's family create compost or burn wood for cooking, they add to global carbon emissions. Their contributions are no doubt negligible, but the millions of such tiny contributions some to a sizable amount, and having consequences that people everywhere are likely to experience in different ways. It can be that the feedbacks are positive, so that the whole contribution is greater than the sum of the parts. Strikingly, unintended consequences can include emergent features, such as the market prices, and which the demand for goods more or less equals their supply. Earlier, I gave a description of Becky and Desta's lives. Understanding their lives involves a lot more. It requires analysis, which usually calls for further description. To conduct an analysis, we first of all need to identify the material prospects the girls' households face, now and in the future, under uncertain contingencies. Second, we need to uncover the character of their choices and the pathways by which their choices made by millions of households like Becky's and Desta's go to produce the prospects they all face. Which, if I may add my opinion or thoughts upon, is a fascinating cycle if you think about it. We all have millions of lives that seem very distinct and separate from each other, and yet when you total us all up, well, in the age of what you might call the Anthropocene, we are now the biggest factor on the environment. So actually we are producing the conditions, as a collective, that we live in. Perhaps some of the more prosperous nations that burn more fossil fuels have more of an impact than others, but ultimately the entire of humanity is the biggest factor shaping the living conditions of ourselves, which is, I think, quite poetic. But there is plenty of stuff to read, so let us not dwell upon my thoughts for too long. I'm just some guy doing a master's. Moving swiftly onwards. Thirdly, and relatedly, we need to uncover the pathways by which the families came to inherit their current circumstances. These amount to a tall, even forbidding order. Moreover, there is a thought that can haunt us. Since everything probably affects everything else, how can we ever make sense of the social world? Such is the bane of anthropologists and social science students everywhere. If we are weighed down by that worry, though, we won't ever make any progress. Every discipline that I am familiar with draws caricatures of the world in order to make sense of it, simplifications, if you will. The modern economist does this by building models, which are deliberately stripped-down representations of the phenomena out there. When I say stripped down, I really mean stripped down. It isn't uncommon among us economists to focus on one or two causal factors and exclude everything else, hoping that this will enable us to understand how just those aspects of reality work and interact. The economist John Maynard Keynes described our subject thus: economics is a science of thinking in terms of models, joined to the art of choosing models which are relevant to the contemporary world. As economists deal with quantifiable objects, such as calories consumed, hours worked, tons of steel produced, miles of cable laid, square kilometers of equatorial forests destroyed, the models are almost always mathematical constructs. They can be stated in words, but mathematics is an enormously efficient way to express the model, more in discovering the implications of a model. Applied mathematics and physicists have known this for a long time, but it was only in the second half of the 20th century that economists brazenly adopted that research tactic, as have related disciplines such as ecology. The art of good modeling is to generate a lot of understanding from focusing on a very small number of causal factors. I say art because there is no formula for creating a good model. The acid test of a model is whether it discriminates among alternative explanations of a phenomenon. Those that survive empirical tests are accepted, at least for a while, until further evidence comes along that casts doubts on them, in which case economists go back to their drawing board to create better, not necessarily bigger, models, and so on. I would say that that's very much the same thing that causes the models of science to be replaced. You accept a certain theory until you discover more evidence that causes you to make a more advanced, or perhaps a more simple but more accurate model. The methodology I have sketched here, all too briefly, enables economists to make a type of prediction that doesn't involve forecasting the future, but instead to make predictions of what the data that haven't yet been collected from the contemporary world will reveal. This is risky business, but if a model is to illuminate, it had better do more than just offer explanations after the events. Until recently, economists studied economic history in the same way historians study social and political history. They tried to uncover reasons why events in a particular place unfolded in the way they did, by identifying what they believed to be the key drivers there. The stress was on the uniqueness of the events being studied, a classic research topic in that. Excuse me. A classic research topic in that mold involved asking why the first industrial revolution occurred in the 18th century and why it took place in England. As you can see, the question was based on three presumptions: that there was a first industrial revolution, that it occurred in the 18th century, and it was based in England. All three premises have been questioned, of course, but there was an enormous amount of work to be done, even among those who had arrived at these premises from historical study. In the event, the literature built around those questions is one of the great achievements of economic history. In recent years, economists have added to a statistical approach to the study of the past. The new approach stays close to economic theory by laying emphasis on the generality of the processes that shape events. It adopts the view that a theory should uncover those features that are common among economic pathways in different places at different times. Admittedly, no two economies are the same, but modern economists work on the commonality in the human experience, not so much on its differences. Say you want to identify the contemporary features in Desta's and Becky's worlds that best explain why the standard of living in the former is so much lower than in the latter. A body of economic models tells you that those features are represented by the variables x, y, and z. You look up international statistics on x, y, and z from a sample of perhaps 149 countries. The figures differ from country to country, but you regard the variables themselves as the explanatory factors common to all the countries in the sample. In other words, you interpret the 149 countries as parallel economies, and you treat features that are unique to each country as idiosyncrasies of that country. Of course, you aren't quite at the liberty to model those idiosyncrasies any way you like. Statistical theory, which in the present context is called econometrics, will set limits on the way that you are able to model them. On the basis of the data on the 149 countries in your sample, you can now test whether you should be confident that X, Y, and are the factors determining the standard of living. Suppose the tests inform you that you are entitled to be confident. Then further analysis with the data will also enable you to determine how much of the variation in the standard of living in a sample is explained by variations in X in the sample, by variations in Y, and by variations in Z. Those proportions will give you a sense of the relative importance of the factors that determine the standard of living. Suppose 80% of the variation in the standard of living in those 149 countries can be explained by the variation in X in a sample, the remaining 20% by variations in Y and Z. You wouldn't be unjustified to conclude, tentatively, that X is the prime explanatory variable. There are enormous problems in applying statistics to economic data. For example, it may be that your economic models, taken together, suggest that there could be as many as, say, 67 factors determining the standard of living, not just X, Y, and Z. However, you could have a sample of only 149 countries. Any statistician will now tell you that 149 is too small a number for the task of unraveling the role of 69 factors, as there are other problems besetting the econometrician. But before you abandon statistics and rush back to the narrative style of empirical discourse, ask yourself why anyone should believe one scholar's historical narrative over another's. You may even wonder why the scholar's literary flair may have influenced your appreciation of her work. Someone now reassures you that the author of a historical narrative has a model in mind. He tells you that the author's model influenced her choice of the evidence displayed in her work, and that she chose as she did only after having sifted through a great deal of evidence. You ask in response how you are to judge whether her conceptual model is better than someone else's. Which brings us back to the problem of testing alternative models of social phenomena. In the next chapter, we will discover that historical narratives continue to play an important role in modern economics, but they are put to work in conjunction with model building and econometric tests. There are implicit assumptions underlying econometric tests that are hard to evaluate, such as how country-specific idiosyncrasies are modeled in only one of them. So, economic statistics are often, at best, translucent. or semi-transparent if you're unfamiliar with that word. It isn't uncommon for several competing models to coexist, each having its own champion. Model building data availability, historical narratives, and advances in econometric technique reinforce one another. As the economist Robert Solow expresses it, facts ask for explanations, and explanations ask for new facts. In this monograph, I first want to give you a feel for the way we economists go about uncovering the economic pathways that shape Becky and Desta's lives. I shall do that by addressing the three sorts of questions that were identified earlier as our concern. I shall then explain why we need economic policies and how we should go about identifying good ones. We will certainly build models as we go along, but I shall use mostly words to describe them. I shall refer to empirical findings from anthropology, demography, ecology, geography, political science, sociology, and of course, economics itself. But the lens through which we will study the social world is that of economics. We will assume a point of view of the circumstances of living that gives prominence to the allocation of scarce resources, among contemporaries and across the generations. My idea is to take you on a tour to see how far we are able to reach an understanding of the social world around us and beyond.